She was standing 3 feet away from her husband when she watched him fall in love with someone else. Not fall out of love with her. That would have been easier. This was worse. This was watching a man wrap his arms around another woman with a tenderness he had once saved only for her, and realizing, in that one frozen second, that she had already lost him long before she ever saw his face. If you've ever loved someone so completely that you forgot to save a little bit of yourself for you, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Because what Emma does next isn't what you think. Her name was Emma Reyes. 6 years ago, she married a man with nothing but a business plan and a stubborn kind of hope. Tonight, she is about to become the only person in the room who isn't surprised by what happens next. His name was Marcus Whitmore. 34 years old. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the kind of smile that used to make grown women forget their own names. Successful now. Powerful now. Almost unrecognizable from the boy who used to fall asleep at his desk with a cold cup of coffee in his hand and Emma's coat draped over his shoulders. And somewhere between the man he used to be and the man he'd become, he had learned how to lie without flinching. This is their story. Or, more honestly, this is the story of the moment Emma stopped being a woman waiting to be chosen, and became a woman who chose herself. Let's begin. Emma Reyes had never been the kind of woman who needed grand gestures. She didn't need diamonds. She didn't need her name on a building or her photo in a magazine. What she needed, what she had built her entire life around, brick by careful brick, was simple: a man who looked at her like she mattered, in a house that felt like home, with a love that didn't need an audience to be real. For the first 3 years of her marriage to Marcus, she had that. Or she believed she did, which at the time felt like the same thing. She remembered the early days with a clarity that almost hurt. The apartment above the laundromat on 9th Street, the one with the radiator that clanked all night and the window that never quite closed. Marcus used to joke that the noise was their alarm clock, their lullaby, their soundtrack. Back then he had nothing but an idea scrawled across a legal pad: a logistics company that would cut delivery costs for small businesses by 40%, he used to say, eyes lit up like a man who'd swallowed a star. Nobody believed in that idea. Not the banks. Not his college friends, who quietly stopped returning his calls once the rejection started piling up. Not even his own father, who told him over a stiff Thanksgiving dinner that he was wasting his 20s chasing smoke. Emma believed in him. She believed in him when she took a second job waitressing on weekends so they could make rent. She believed in him when she sat on the floor of that cramped apartment at 2 in the morning, going over spreadsheets with him because he couldn't afford an accountant yet. She believed in him so hard, so completely, that some nights she forgot to ask herself whether anyone believed in her the same way back. "When we make it," Marcus used to whisper into her hair, "I'm going to give you everything you ever gave up for me." She used to smile at that. She used to think it was romantic. She didn't yet understand that a promise like that carries an assumption buried inside it, that somewhere along the way, she'd have to give things up. That the sacrifice was already decided. Only the size of it was still unknown. The business did not fail. That was the strange cruelty of it. If it had failed, maybe they would have stayed exactly as they were, poor and tired and impossibly close. But it didn't fail. It succeeded beyond anything either of them had dared to imagine. 3 years in, Whitmore Logistics landed its first major contract. 5 years in, Marcus was being profiled in business magazines as the quiet disruptor reshaping regional freight. By the 6th year of their marriage, he had an office on the top floor of a glass building downtown, a title that made strangers straighten their posture when they heard it, and a calendar so full that Emma sometimes had to schedule dinner with her own husband 3 weeks in advance. Success didn't just change what Marcus had. It changed who Marcus was. It started small enough that Emma told herself she was imagining it. A missed anniversary dinner, rescheduled twice, then forgotten entirely. A phone that used to sit face up on the kitchen counter, now carried into every room, angled just slightly away from her. Late nights that used to come with an apologetic text, stuck in a meeting, I'm sorry, save me a plate, that slowly stopped coming with any explanation at all. She told herself it was the pressure of running a growing company. She told herself every marriage went through seasons. She told herself, more than anything, that a man who had once believed in her enough to build a whole future around her couldn't simply stop. But belief, it turns out, is not the same as truth. And Emma was about to learn the difference in the cruelest way possible. It was a Tuesday in early October when she decided to surprise him. She'd had the idea that morning, watching the light come through the kitchen window while she made coffee alone, again. Marcus's favorite dish, braised short ribs with the rosemary potatoes his mother used to make, the meal Emma had taught herself to cook during their second year together because it was the only thing that made him talk about his childhood without getting quiet and far away. She hadn't made it in over a year. Maybe that was the real reason she wanted to bring it to him that night. Not romance exactly. Something closer to hope, the last stubborn ember of it, still glowing somewhere she hadn't let herself examine too closely. She packed the dinner into an insulated bag, the kind she used to bring to his old, cramped office when they were young and broke and inseparable. She drove downtown as the sun went down, humming along to the radio, rehearsing a small, hopeful speech in her head. I know you've been busy. I miss you. Let's just eat together tonight, no work talk, just us. The security guard at the front desk of Whitmore Logistics knew her by now, knew her well enough to wave her through with a warm, "Evening, Mrs. Whitmore," without even checking the visitor log. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt longer than usual. Emma remembers watching the numbers climb and feeling something strange stir in her stomach. Not excitement, exactly. Something quieter. Something like instinct trying to warn her before her mind caught up. The executive floor was mostly dark, the way it usually was after 7. A single strip of light spilled from beneath Marcus's office door at the end of the hall. Emma smiled, adjusted the bag on her arm, and started walking toward it. That was when she heard the laughter. A woman's laughter, low, warm, familiar in a way that made the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. Emma had never heard that laugh in person. But she had heard it once before, muffled and distant, bleeding out of Marcus's phone speaker on a night he'd stepped into the hallway to take a call he said was just work. She stopped walking. The office door was open just a few inches, enough for a blade of light to cut across the hallway carpet, enough for Emma to see without being seen. And there, inside the glow of his desk lamp, stood a woman in a red dress. Dark hair falling in soft waves over one shoulder. A hand resting, casual and easy, on Marcus's forearm, the way you touch someone when touching them no longer feels like a risk. When it feels like a habit. Emma had seen that name light up Marcus's phone screen before, late at night, always disappearing a little too quickly whenever she walked into the room. Vanessa. Seeing the woman in the flesh was different. Seeing her wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a fact, standing 5 feet away in expensive heels, laughing at something Marcus had just said. And it was the way Marcus looked at her that broke something loose in Emma's chest. Not guilt. Not the frantic, caught red-handed panic Emma had almost hoped for, because at least panic would have meant he still feared losing her. What Emma saw on her husband's face instead was softness. Warmth. The exact look he used to give Emma across a candlelit table on 9th Street, back when the whole world was still just an idea on a legal pad and she was the only person in it who mattered. Emma pushed the door open. The hinge gave a small, apologetic creak. Both of them turned. For a long moment, nobody said anything at all. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her. "Marcus," Emma finally said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Steadier than she felt. His face changed instantly, not into shame, but into something harder. Something almost annoyed, as if she were the one intruding on a life that belonged, by rights, to him. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Emma looked down at the bag still hanging from her arm, suddenly aware of how foolish it felt. The rosemary potatoes. The careful, hopeful drive across town. The little speech she'd rehearsed about missing him. "I came to surprise you," she said quietly. Vanessa's eyes flicked between them, and for a second something like decency flickered across her face. "I should go," she murmured, already reaching for her coat. "No." Marcus said it before she'd taken a single step. He reached out and caught Vanessa's hand, holding it there, holding her there, in front of his wife, as though daring the moment to mean anything less than what it so clearly meant. Emma felt something crack somewhere deep in her chest, quiet, precise, almost surgical. Not a shattering. A splitting. The sound a bone makes right before it breaks clean instead of shattering into pieces you can never fully collect again. She did not cry. She did not scream, did not throw the bag of food across the room, did not do any of the things some smaller, more wounded part of her almost wanted to do. She simply stood there, watching her husband hold another woman's hand like a declaration, and felt the last 6 years of her life rearrange themselves in front of her, silently, into a shape she almost didn't recognize. Marcus watched her face, waiting. Emma could see it now, looking back, for the explosion he'd clearly been bracing for. The tears. The accusations. The scene that would let him play the exhausted, cornered man forced into an affair by a wife who'd stopped understanding him. She gave him none of it. "Is this what you want?" she asked instead. Her voice was almost gentle. Almost curious, the way you might ask a stranger for directions. Marcus hesitated, just long enough that some tiny, foolish, hopeful part of Emma leaned toward that hesitation like a plant leaning toward the last patch of sun. Then he said the word that would live in her memory for the rest of her life. Yes. One syllable. That was all it took to end 6 years. Emma nodded slowly, as if he'd just confirmed something she'd already known for months and simply hadn't allowed herself to say out loud. She stepped forward and set the insulated bag down on the corner of his desk, careful, deliberate, the way you set down something you no longer intend to carry. "Then you don't have to worry about me anymore," she said. Marcus frowned, thrown by her calm. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done." She turned and walked out of the office. No slammed door. No parting insult thrown over her shoulder. Just the soft click of her heels against the hallway floor, growing fainter, until the elevator doors closed and swallowed the sound completely. Marcus stood there in the sudden silence, Vanessa's hand still loosely in his, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely unsteady. He had expected Emma to fight. He had spent months, if he was honest with himself, half preparing for the fight, rehearsing his own defenses, the excuses about stress and distance and growing apart. He had expected tears he could comfort his way out of, accusations he could deflect, a wound he could eventually talk his way around, the way he always had. He had not expected nothing. And nothing, it turned out, was so much louder than anything he could have imagined. The next morning, Emma packed one suitcase. She moved through the house methodically, without hurry, without the frantic energy of a woman running from something. She folded her clothes the way her mother had taught her, corners matched, edges smooth, because some small, stubborn part of her needed at least one thing that morning to be done carefully and right. Marcus found her in the bedroom just after 7, still in yesterday's clothes, his tie hanging loose around his open collar. He hadn't slept. It showed. "You're really leaving?" he asked, and for once there was no anger in it, only something close to disbelief. Emma zipped the suitcase closed. She slid the wedding ring from her finger, slowly, deliberately, the way you remove something that has grown into your skin, and set it gently on the kitchen table on her way past him, beside the fruit bowl neither of them had refilled in weeks. "You already left me a long time ago," she said. "I just finally caught up." Then she picked up her suitcase, walked out the front door, and did not look back. She didn't know it yet, but somewhere in a closet Marcus hadn't opened in years, an old cardboard box was waiting, full of photographs, and one handwritten note, that would eventually bring him to his knees. She didn't know yet that Vanessa's love came with a price tag Emma had never once asked him to pay. And she didn't know yet just how far a man has to fall before he finally understands what he had. Last time, Emma Reyes walked out of her marriage without a single tear. She left the ring on the table. She left the man who once promised her everything. What she didn't leave behind was the truth, and the truth was only just beginning to surface. If you thought Marcus would move on easily, stay close. Because the woman he chose over his wife is about to show him exactly what she really wanted all along. The first week without Emma, Marcus told himself he was fine. He told himself this the way a man tells himself a lot of things when he's trying to outrun a feeling he doesn't want to name, repeating it in the shower, repeating it in the car, repeating it at 2 in the morning when the other side of the bed felt less like empty space and more like an accusation. He threw himself into work, the way he always had whenever life got complicated. Except this time, work didn't fill the silence the way it used to. Meetings that once excited him now felt like static. Numbers that used to sharpen his focus blurred together on the page. More than once, his assistant had to repeat a question twice before he even registered she was talking to him. Vanessa moved into the space Emma had left behind quickly. Almost too quickly. Within 2 weeks, she was suggesting dinners at restaurants where the tasting menu alone cost more than Marcus and Emma used to spend on groceries in a month. Within 3 weeks, she was mentioning, casually, always casually, a friend who worked at a boutique on Fifth Avenue that had just gotten in the most beautiful pieces, her eyes lingering on Marcus a beat too long after she said it. He bought her the bracelet. Then the bag. Then, after she mentioned offhand that her lease was getting complicated, he found himself quietly covering 3 months of rent on an apartment he had never even seen the inside of. He told himself this was simply what new relationships looked like when you had the means to be generous. He told himself Vanessa made him feel alive, made him feel like the man he used to admire in the mirror before success had slowly sanded down his edges into something colder. But somewhere underneath the gifts and the dinners and the late nights, a small, persistent question kept surfacing, one Marcus tried very hard not to look at directly. Why did none of this feel like anything? Emma had never once asked him for a single expensive thing in 6 years of marriage. Not a ring bigger than the modest one he'd saved 4 months to afford. Not a vacation, not a designer anything, not so much as a nicer car when the old one started rattling at highway speeds. What she had asked for, quietly, consistently, in 100 small ways he hadn't recognized as asking at all, was simply his attention. His presence. The version of himself that used to sit across from her at a wobbly kitchen table and talk about their future like it was a country they were going to build together, brick by brick. He hadn't given her that in years. And now he was giving Vanessa everything else instead, as if the two things were somehow interchangeable. They were not. The unraveling started on an ordinary Thursday evening, the kind of evening that gives no warning at all before it changes everything. Marcus had come home early, a rarity, these past months, hoping, if he was honest with himself, that the quiet of the house might settle whatever restlessness had been sitting in his chest all week. He wandered from room to room without quite knowing what he was looking for, until he found himself standing in the hallway closet, staring at a cardboard box he hadn't opened since he and Emma moved into this house 4 years ago. He almost didn't open it. Some instinct told him not to, the same instinct that makes you hesitate before touching a wound to see if it still hurts. He opened it anyway. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, unsorted, edges soft with age. Marcus sat down on the closet floor without meaning to, his knees folding beneath him as if his body understood, before his mind did, that this was going to take a while. There was a photo of him at 26, asleep at a cluttered desk with a cheap laptop, Emma's coat draped over his shoulders like a blanket, her handwriting visible on a sticky note pressed to the screen, "Eat something. I love you. E." There was a photo of Emma standing outside their first, tiny office, a converted storage unit with a hand-painted sign, grinning so wide it looked like her face might not hold it, both arms raised in the air the day they'd landed their very first client. There was a photo from the night Whitmore Logistics secured its first major investment, the two of them squeezed into a photo booth at a diner because they couldn't afford anywhere else to celebrate, Emma's head thrown back mid-laugh, Marcus staring at her instead of the camera. And near the bottom of the box, tucked inside a folded square of paper gone soft from handling, was a note in Emma's familiar, slanted handwriting. "I'll always believe in you, even when you stop believing in yourself." Marcus sat there for a long time, the note held loosely between two fingers, feeling something in his chest give way slowly, like ice cracking under weight it was never built to hold. He remembered, suddenly and completely, a version of himself he'd nearly forgotten existed, a man who used to fall asleep grateful, not restless. A man whose ambition had once been fueled by wanting to build a life with someone, not simply wanting more for the sake of wanting. Somewhere between that man and the one sitting on the closet floor now, something essential had gone missing. And it hadn't been Emma who'd taken it. He called her that night. No answer. He called again the next morning. Straight to voicemail. By the third day of silence, something close to panic had begun to settle into his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome, the specific panic of a man realizing, far too late, that the person he'd always assumed would wait for him might, in fact, not be waiting at all. It was around this same time that Vanessa's carefully maintained composure began, very quietly, to slip. Marcus noticed it first in small things. The way she grew irritated when he mentioned needing to cut back on spending for a quarter, citing cash flow adjustments at the company that were, in truth, entirely fabricated, a test, though he hadn't fully admitted that to himself yet. The way her interest in his day seemed to evaporate the moment he stopped mentioning numbers, deals, acquisitions. The way she'd once asked him, almost idly, over a candlelit dinner he was paying for, what the company might be worth if it ever went public. He had laughed it off at the time. He didn't laugh now. One evening, arriving at her apartment earlier than she expected, Marcus heard her on the phone through the door before he knocked, her voice pitched low, amused, talking to someone Marcus didn't recognize. "He's exactly the type," she was saying, punctuated by a soft, satisfied laugh. "Used to being adored. You give a man like that a little warmth after his wife stops giving it to him, and he'll hand you the keys to everything." Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, his hand still raised, halfway to knocking. "The wife left already," Vanessa continued, "didn't even put up a fight, which honestly made it easier than I expected. Give it a few more months. He's already talking about moving me into the penthouse." Marcus lowered his hand slowly, silently, and stepped back from the door as though it had suddenly caught fire. He didn't confront her that night. He told himself it was strategy, that a man in his position needed proof, needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with before he made his next move. If he was honest with himself, though, some smaller, more wounded part of him simply needed time. Time to sit with the particular humiliation of realizing that the woman he had upended his marriage for had never seen him as anything more than an opportunity in a well-tailored suit. He thought of Emma's face in his office doorway. Calm. Unshaken. Asking him, so quietly, "Is this what you want?" He hadn't understood, in that moment, what he was truly choosing between. He understood now. And the understanding arrived with a cost far steeper than he had ever imagined paying. Emma, meanwhile, was rebuilding. Slowly. Carefully. The way you rebuild anything worth keeping, not in one dramatic gesture, but in 100 small, deliberate choices made on ordinary days when nobody was watching. She was staying with her sister, Claire, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment across town, sleeping on a pull-out couch that creaked whenever she turned over, and somehow finding that she slept more peacefully there than she had in her own bed in over a year. She hadn't cried the way she expected to. There had been a night, about 10 days in, when the full weight of everything finally caught up with her, sitting on Claire's bathroom floor at midnight, silent tears sliding down her face while her sister sat beside her, saying nothing, simply present, the way only family can be. But even that night, Emma noticed something strange stirring beneath the grief. Relief. Not because the marriage had ended, she had loved Marcus, genuinely and completely, for a long time. But relief at finally setting down a weight she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying, the exhausting, invisible labor of trying to hold two people's happiness together with only one person still trying. She started applying for jobs again, dusting off a design portfolio she hadn't touched since the early years of their marriage, when she'd quietly shelved her own career ambitions to support Marcus's. She found, to her quiet surprise, that a small local firm remembered her early work and wanted to bring her in for an interview. Claire watched her get ready that morning with an expression somewhere between pride and disbelief. "You seem different," she said. "I feel different," Emma admitted, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, not for Marcus, not for anyone, just for herself. "I spent 6 years asking whether I was enough for him. I don't think I've asked myself once, this whole time, whether he was enough for me." Claire smiled, soft and knowing. "And now?" Emma considered the question honestly, the way she was slowly learning to consider everything. "Now I think I finally understand the difference between loving someone, and losing yourself trying to keep them." She got the job 3 days later. It was smaller than anything she'd once imagined for herself, back when she was young and full of plans that had nothing to do with anyone else's dreams. But it was hers. Entirely, unmistakably hers. And somewhere across town, unaware that his wife was building something new from the wreckage he'd left behind, Marcus Whitmore was about to discover that the woman he'd chosen over her had never wanted him at all. Only what he had.